let's zoom out a little and talk about careers broadly. This is now going beyond electrical engineering. When students, their parents, and a small group of well wishers sit down to try to figure out what a high school graduate should be doing with their life, there's a there are very limited parameters that they seem to factor in into their decision. I've seen even so-called educated people, and the two words I hear bandied around quite a bit: scope and package. Is there scope in this discipline, and what is the package? I feel very sad for that discourse. Help us understand what is a more knowledgeable framework in which parents, their well wishers, can really think through and do what is right for the country and for themselves, of course.
Well, it's understandable because you have the largest young population in the world
Yeah.
trying to find careers for themselves. On the other hand, it's not a very bleak situation because you also know that in the next 10 years, we are going to go as a country from 4 trillion to 8 trillion and beyond. So, where is all that 4 trillion is going to come from? It's going to come from these people. Therefore, and then, so 16 trillion, 20 years from now. So, the point is, everybody knows that is there. Everybody knows these people are there, but each individual wants to minimize the risk and maximize the possibility of getting it right. It's understandable. Okay. The thing is, scope is what? So, first of all, I think people know whether you are doing traditional padashala or whether you are doing modern engineering, education or whatever. People know that if you learn some things, skills or knowledge at a fundamental level, that's where it pays off. Everybody knows that. But everybody also knows that the opportunity, in a large pool like this, where people are picking individuals off the internet or whatever, of staffing companies and so on, not necessarily based on individual knowledge of the potential hire. People also know that having the right, making the right noises at the entry stage can be important. So that's why they worry about what branch to take, what
Yes.
to know, and so on, even if it's not at a fundamental level. Okay, so that's okay. It's understandable. And scope is related to, since AI, for example, is entering everything. It's a no brainer that if you learn the basics of AI, you have the maximum scope.
Correct.
Okay, if you learn something, let us say, specific to numerical electromagnetics, you have a scope in companies that are building the latest motors and so on, generators, but that's all, not in everything, right? So that is an issue. You want to maximize scope. You want to learn things which are used across the board. Okay, every human being has to eat, so obviously cooking always has scope. Food
Sure.
services always have scope,
Sure.
right? So it's not going to go away until food becomes unimportant, right? So that's not like that. That's also true. And I would say, if you are not fortunate to get, if you're not that fortunate to get a higher quality education, if your education is of middling quality, then the pay package, the opportunities, the first opportunity for a job, because the rest of the learning happens on the job.
Yeah.
But the first opportunity is a mixture of being at the right place, right time, and so on, and the way the current situation in the industry and so on. So, uh, you know, uh, the packages, obviously, when you take people who are not that well trained or that well at the entry level, the packages are not that high, and many people who look for their first job who come from families may be having financial stress also. So it's understandable why they worry about package. So having said that, therefore, I think a lot of people have a genuine reason to worry about scope and package. But having said that, let me start at the other end.
Yeah.
I think in places like the best education institutions, I don't necessarily mean the IITs, any institution that does a good job of education. It could be a degree college also. You know the ones they have. Even now, NIRF does a pretty good job of at least statistics. They may miss one or two here and there, but statistically, I think they capture the leading institutions in all disciplines. And the students of those colleges and those IITs and those institutions, medical colleges, everything get placed very easily because everybody knows, who hiring also knows that these people are very good. They are capable of learning even if they don't know something today. So something that you need today. So they all get picked up. And if you look at the median salaries in their placement data, it's all pretty good, right? But there are always these outliers that who are getting picked up at fancy salaries in those places. So there is one set of people who are always aiming for those outliers. and without realizing that no matter what, very few people are going to get those, right? And if you actually study who gets those, it has very little to do with any predictability about that individual, either capability wise. Statistically, yes, some of them are shining. They are shining in their academics, they're shining in their, even in the 2 3 years internships and so on. But and some of them will probably therefore uh, there's some predictability that they might have capabilities which are above the ordinary. But in many cases, that is statistically that's not so. Statistically, I think many of them are not predictable. So I think the first thing is students and parents should realize that if your aim is for that, and no harm in wishing that, but I think it's not a predictable thing that I can actually work for it. If it happens, good. Doesn't happen, you should be happy because anyway, whatever the rest of it is not bad. The median is not bad. So it's more important to worry about learning and working in things that you like to do, because your ability to learning is not going to end in. I said the same thing to some students this morning in class who asked. The course got over. Some of them got around asking these things. So I think the process of learning is not going to end. Hardly the beginning in college. You have to continue learning on the job. It takes 10, 12 years minimum to become good at anything. So you have to worry about whether the play where you're working is interesting enough for you and gives you the opportunity to learn and grow. If you, unless you're getting up every morning raring to go and continue the learning process, it's going to be very, very difficult. So as long as the package is good enough to live comfortably, and so in these institutions where the median itself is quite good, I think it's advisable for people to learn not to target the outliers. Just if it happens to you, you're one of the lucky ones. If it doesn't happen to you, fine. You know, you really can't predict for it. Okay, plan for it. And I think if you look at the people who have either had a great startup, with a grand IPO, or even a great job in one of the top companies in the world, if they are honest, many of them will tell you that they really don't know what it is about them that got them that. Okay, so um, I think the rest, for people who are who are having to have to settle for a more middling education and so on, which doesn't necessarily prepare them for the world outside, where more of the learning is going to happen on the job than in the degree. Okay, that's all it is, right? So I know so many people who are after 20 years no different from the one who came from an IIT or something, but they did all their learning after, most good part of their learning afterwards. Now I'm not saying they didn't learn anything in college. That's not true. Subject wise they have learned some things, but more than beyond the subject, the learning of the other aspects of life skills are probably this opportunity is probably not very different depending on where you go. So many of them have learned those in those other colleges. I don't want to belittle the contribution of those colleges, but where the academic learning or the knowledge learning itself is of a more middling level, I think the point is they should, I think it's understandable why they worry about the package and the scope. It's understandable that they want to minimize the risks by going for learning those skills in those 4 years, or getting that knowledge in those 4 years that has a maximum scope. So AI, for example, would be a would be a candidate today. A circuit branches were the candidate 15, 20 years ago. It's understandable. But I would say that there's so much evidence that if you didn't get an opportunity to learn those also, it doesn't matter. You will, in a growing economy like India, where the next 4 trillion and the next 8 trillion per year are going to be 12 trillion are going to be added in the next 10 and 20 years. I think even niche areas, people are going to find employment. It's more important to make sure that you are good at it. I mean, let's say you are a mechanical engineer and you specialize on, on projectile motion and bulletproof type of technology, how to build bulletproof vests, how to build things that can withstand explosion, so on. Even that will have a reasonable, the number of people needed in the country may be 100 or 200, but there are agencies, there are labs, there are companies that need to do that.
Yeah.
So that way, I would say even very niche areas there's employment opportunities. Obviously, the scope is very little. You can count on the finger when your fingers are one palm, which companies can recruit you. But where will they go? They need people also.
Yes.
So they will have to come to you. So I think it's possible, but so I would not blame people for looking at scope. I would not blame a lot of people for looking at package. It may be important even at the entry level for some families, but I would say the moment you get into the frame where your package is decent, but you're constantly looking at people who have got these fancy things, I think that's where you should stop.